Guten Tag. Welcome to tonight's shir. What's a Shabbos Lech Lecha? Hashgacha Pratis on Friday, after I sent out the shir, the list of questions, I got a question about Bris Milah, connected to the parsha. It's also my father's yard site this coming Thursday. So I'm going to address first a question about. So someone called me up and he says that his moil was a Reformed Jew, and he's asking whether there's a need for him to have anything done. So here we have on the screen, you have from Shulchan Aruch Yeridea, Reish Samach Daled. Talks about whether who is eligible to do a bris, and then the woman can be, and then we have a Oved Kechovim, even if his circumcised cannot be a moil. And if he did, however, there's nothing to be done. There's nothing to be done afterwards. That's the Shulchan Aruch. The Ramah, that's in the green writing, if a bris was done by a goy, so then there's necessary, when at a later stage, to have a prick and to cause some bleeding to make up for, it should be l'shem mitzvahs milah. V'chein iker. So here we have first the machlokas mechaber and the Ramah, whether if a person who's ineligible to make a bris did one, does it warrant hatafas dam bris? Mechaber says not necessary. Ramah says it is necessary. Next thing he says, mumer l'chol ha'torah kula, oishahu mumer le'arelus. A person who has an apostate, has gone away from a heretic, has dropped the whole Torah, so then he's got a din of Evikacham. So as you read the Ramah, so you see here that you should have to do Hatafas Dambris. So it's good to know, first of all, that you have your Machlekas Haposkim. The question also, when you say a Reformed Jew, how do you know exactly where he was in his mind as far as Torah Missinai, etc.? But he went to Reform Temple doesn't necessarily mean that he doesn't believe in Torah Missinai, etc. We don't know. We don't know where his position was on this. So it's perhaps a suffix moment. But then there's another very interesting thing. Now listen carefully. We have a loshon, and when it comes to shlichus, Ma atem b'nei bris, af shluchachem b'nei bris. Just like you are b'nei bris, people of the covenant, your shliach also has to be a person of the covenant, and if not, he cannot be a shliach. So here's the following dilemma. If you're going to say that a person has dropped Yiddishkeit totally, is not a ben bris, then he cannot be a shliach, and he cannot appoint a shliach for that matter. So on the margin, you see at the bottom, on the left bottom, there's a reference to Tshuvas Yad Eliyahu, which I used a few moments before to look up. So his story was a get was sent with a shliach, and that shliach decided to drop Yiddishkeit. He became Gishmatzach. Now, can he still be a shliach? If you say that he's not a ben bris, that he can't be a shliach, he can't deliver the get. The scenarios it works whenever you have, unfortunately, a person who's gone away from Yiddishkeit totally, and he's left a Yiddish wife, and she's stuck. So she asks, and you plead with him to give a get, and if he cooperates, okay, I'll give a get. He doesn't write the get; he's appointing the Rosh Sofer. Sofer is a shliach, but if he is not a ben bris, he can't appoint the Sofer to be a shliach. He can't write a get. So that's really and that's not followed. Yeah, it is. We would do the get in such a case. What's very, very interesting is that this at the bottom here is from the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch in Siman Kuf Peites. I don't know whether I once discussed this on this shir in benching. we say, if there's a goy present, so then we say, to exclude the goy from the brach. So then the Mogen Avraham says, what happens if you have a mumer, apikoidus is in the room? So he says you should say bris to exclude him. The Even Ha'oizer, later the Mogen Avraham, before the Alter Rebbe, he really goes to town in Simukov Peitas, says, no, he's a Afal Pishachota Yisrael, and he is called a Ben Bris. That a person who's dropped Yiddishkeit is still called a Ben Bris, and therefore there's no point in excluding him. He's part of Klal Yisrael regardless. And this is what the Alter Rebbe is paskening over here. The person who's dropped Yiddishkeit is still called a Ben Bris. Shafa Pishachota Yisrael. Therefore, when there's a mumer in the house, we should not exclude him by saying Kolon Yacha Bnei Bris to exclude him from the bracha. Even if there's a mumer, he still remains part of Bnei Bris. And as a result, the mumer is a Ben Bris. And therefore, this Reformed Jew is still called a Ben Bris. And as a result, he is a Shachas Teshliches, and if he may perform the Bris would be kosher. This is the Even Ha'ozer. There's also others who disagree with the Ramah. In this over here, the Shagas Arya disagrees with the Ramah. The Rebbe Kiva Eger has a long comment on this. So we have numerous poskim who say that a mumer, at least, never mind about a goy, but if there's a mumer, one would not need to do the hatafas dambris. And so I was, able to tell this fellow that he does not need to do anything. There are minority of poskim who say that you do have to, but there's ample grounds. The Mechaber says it's not necessary, and who says it's a mumer b'chlal, etc. All right. This al psak of the Even Ha'ozer, followed by the Alter Rebbe against the Mogen Avraham, became very useful for me in the following scenario. There was someone who became frum, and his parents still kept nothing. At some stage, he realizes, he's about 30, he realizes he never had a pidyon haben. So it happens to be his father's in town, and so we're making a pidyon haben for this 30-year-old Ingerman. The dilemma we have is, who does the mitzvah apply to? We know a baby, of course, the father has a mitzvah to redeem his son. But is that because the baby can't do it himself? Or does it remain the father's privilege, even if the son is now a bar mitzvah himself? So this is a debate in poskim, whether the fact that the son has to be poida himself is only in the absence of the father, or even if the father is present. So what we did was, this is the advice given in poskim, that the son gives the father the 5 sloim, and he says, Tati, I'm giving you this money. If it's my mitzvah to be poida, so I'm appointing you as my shliach to be poida. If it's your mitzvah, I'm giving you the money, and you'll be poida. In this way, the father gives the money to the kohen, either as his own mitzvah to be poida, or as a shliach of his son. So this is what we did. But then afterwards, I realized, hang on a second, the father doesn't keep anything, so he's not shachas to shlichus. So then he hasn't been able to be a shliach to be poida this fellow. He has to do it again. But having now seen the Even Ha'ozer and etc., who say that a mumer is able to appoint a shliach, is able to be a shliach, and therefore the pidyon haben remains valid, and we don't have to start doing it again. Okay, so that was the bonus question for today. The kesher to the Parshas HaShavua and the Yortzeit, etc. Let's move on. So one of our listeners asked me about this idea of Kometz Aleph, or that manner of teaching Aleph base. So for sources, someone had told him it's Halacha L'Moshe Sinai, and that it's he was told that it is crucial, it's important for emunah, to imbue emunah in the child. So he's asking for some sources for these ideas. So the first thing we have on the screen here to the left is a cutout from Sefer HaMinhagim, which towards the end of the volume, there's a bit of it, like we would call it, a miscellaneous section. So here's a sikha of the previous Rebbe in Yud Beis Tammuz Tafshin Daled 1944. He says, when we learn with a child Aleph base with the Nekudas, that imbues in the child Kedusha. The Taimim Nekudas Tagen Oisius, the tunes, the vowels, the crowns, and the letters were given LaMoshe Messinai when he said, Anochi Hashem Elokecha. So when you learn this with a child, that gives him the Koyach HaMesirus Nefesh. But if you learn the child without Tanto, without the spelling out the names, the Trob, the Nekudas, the etc., and the letters, so then it's without Kedusha. And he gives another reference here. So we have here two things here. One is, he says that this is LaMoshe Messinai, that the should we say, the accompanying information together with written Torah of the vowels and there's tunes and the letters have got names. That's not written in the written Torah. But these are also, these accompanying details are Halacha LaMoshe Messinai. That's one thing which we need to corroborate. The other thing is about it being got to do with Emunah, Mesiras Nefesh, and this is something which is a recurrent idea in letters of the Frierdiker Rebbe, of the Rebbe. One can find that. I just want to throw in here also that my father, Alav Shalom, when he, in the early years, when he was here in the early 50s, besides being a shochet, he was also a malamed. There was some kind of cheder on Manor Road here in Stamford Hill, and he was part-time teacher. And there's a letter printed in Nigros Kodesh to my father about the Malochim, which are related. The Nekudas, the names of the Nekudas have a connection to Malochim and the Kedusha of the letters. So just to explain a little bit more, what's the whole discussion here? There is the traditional way of teaching a child Aleph base, and to read, you'll tell the child that this is an Aleph, and then separately you'll teach the child this is a Komets, and then you'll teach the child, and the Komets and the Aleph come together, it's Komets Aleph Op. The modern way was trying to streamline things. Why do you have to do that? Just do O Bovo, there's no name of Aleph, no name of Komets, and just make it shorter. And this is where the Frierdiker Rebbe battled to not allow that innovation, and it should be teaching Dafka Aleph, Komets Aleph, or etc. But meanwhile, let's look for, where is it? Halacha LaMoshe Messinai. Now, the challenge here is that the names of the Nekudas, as in Seirei, Segol, Komets, are not mentioned, as far as I know, not a single time in the Shas, which is very interesting. So, and there's a whole discussion about, and Yoyov got confused between Zecher Amalek and etc. So, did they have Nekudas? And there were those who came. There was particularly someone called a Medaktek called Rabbi Eliyahu Bachur, and he came up with an idea that the Nekudas were actually a later innovation by the Chachmei Tveria, and he, this is, as you can see here, he wrote a sefer called Masoiras HaMasoiras, and in the introduction of the newly published edition, they have a quote from the Chidah, and it's a critique on this point. He says, I saw in the Sefer Tov Tam and Masoiras HaMasoiras, he says that the time in Nekudas were made after the Talmud by the sages in Tveria, and he should be forgiven for his mistake because they halacha l'Moshe Sinai, and they are, as we'll see in Gemara Nedorim, Daf Lamed Zayin. We also know that Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, the teacher of Rebbe, the compiler of the Mishnah, in Tikkun Zohar, talks wonderful things, amazing stuff about the Nekudas and the Taimim, and the Arizal, many years later, in the Drushim of Tanto, which is Taim Nekudas Tag Oisius, and refers us to the Zohar, etc. V'yein laharich. So this is a debate, and we've got here the Reb Eliyahu Bocher had one view, but so now we're going to look at the Gemara in Nedarim. Now, how does it come into the Gemara in Nedarim? Someone's made a vow not to benefit someone. Okay, so he's not allowed to do a pay favor for them, but he's allowed to teach Torah. So then the question is, can he teach that person or their child, can he teach them the Torah, the tunes? So, Scha Pisuk Taimim, Kosova Pisuk Taimim Doidaisahu. He says you can't teach the child. I'm sorry, I think you can, and that is because it's part of Torah. Because Reb Ikar, in the name of Reb Ovin, says in the name of Reb Hananel, the name of Rav, we have a posuk. I think it's in Ezra or somewhere like that. Vayikru b'sefer Torah selikim mefoirosh v'soim sechel vayavinu b'mikra. Vayikru b'sefer Torah selikim. They read in the scroll of Hashem's Torah, Zemikra. That's simply the psukim. Mefoirosh, that they read it mefoirosh, explain. Zeh targum. That's the translation of Onkelos, etc. V'soim sechel, and a logical kind of placement. Elu hapsukim. This is where we got breaks in the text between one verse and the next. Vayovinu b'mikra, and they understood, and they explained the understanding of the mikra. Ze pisuk taimim. This is their annotations. V'yamri lo elo hamasoires. There's a whole masoires is like there's a tradition how each word is choser, mole, etc., etc. Omer Rav Yitzchak. Says Rav Yitzchak, mikra soifrim, v'iter soifrim, v'karyon v'lo chsivon, where you got krieg siv. So there's written one way it's written, read, and not the way it's written. Chsivon v'karyon, it's written, you read it. Halacha l'Moshe Sinai. So here you have very clearly, he's saying that mikra soifrim is halacha l'Moshe Sinai. What is an example of mikra soifrim? Eretz or oretz. Rashi. When there's a pause in the pasuk, it's read oretz. If there's no asnachta, it's in the middle of a pasuk, it's read eretz. So the vowel, whether it's a segel or a komatz, is halacha l'Moshe Sinai. So this is, we see here, there's one basis in the Gemara that the how to vowelize words is already halacha l'Moshe Sinai. On Shemayim Shemoyim, Rashi says that you pronounce them as if they have an aleph inside, but that's a separate thing. But meanwhile, we're seeing here, when it says here that it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai, so here you have, it's the Dorim Daf Lamed Zayin Amid Beis. In the Chidor, he referred to the Tikkun Zohar, and if you want to dabble in that, open up a Tikkun Zohar in the Hakdoma, and you see there's a lot of discussion about the gematria, about the names of the vowels. Yeah. So in the Gemara which we saw, it doesn't say the vowels have names. It just says that there were vowels which were already from Moshe Sinai. Here we're seeing in the Tikkun Zohar, he actually goes to the names of the vowels, and the interesting way how to show it that each of the vowels has amounts to 6, a gematria of 6 somehow or other. The only which I might remember now is the word Shavor. Shavor written Shin base Aleph. The Shin is 3, 300 is 3, base and is 2, and Aleph is 1. So spelling Shavor, Shin base Aleph, brings it to the gematria of 6, and it shows the other nekudas also. But that's why, according to Kabbalah, the vowel called Shavor should be spelled with a base. According to the Bali Nigla, it's spelled with the vav. Okay, so that's a little bit of background for the halacha l'Moshe Sinai stuff. Okay, I see there's a few points over here in the chat, so let's see if I can deal with that. Otherwise, we'll just move on. Is there a difference between, going back to the previous thing, Mumalahaches and Mumalatiyovin? There are those who wanted to make that difference between Mumalahachis and Mumalatiyovin when we say a heretic is eligible, not eligible, but the Ibn Oizer clearly says it in this respect. And as I said, you got a Mumalahachis who's left his wife. Does he not give her a get? So we do allow a get to be given, even though he's a total mummer. Right. So Naphtali is mentioning Gemara often writes Yesh Eim Masoires. That would be a tradition. How do you pronounce this? Basuka, Subasukois. Yes, but it still doesn't necessarily say that there is a vowel system, other than just a. Yeah, it does support it. Yes, I would accept that. Yeah. But here in the Gemara is a little bit more explicit. Right. Right. There is a discussion about whether the Zohar was some took the view that it was put together by someone called Moshe of Leon, but generally that's not accepted, and it is attributed to Rashbi. And yeah, let's move on. So what do we have? Our next question. A very straightforward question, but I'm embarrassed to say that I didn't know the answer. I had to look it up, and therefore I thought I'd share it with you also. So a fellow, it was, I don't know, Monday, Tuesday, I look at my WhatsApp, and it's someone from Europe, and his Kontashul, he doesn't have his tefillin. I guess he'd given them to be checked, and they would only come in later. And there is a minyan in shul, and he wants to daven with a minyan without. So should he daven with the minyan without tefillin, or should he not daven now and wait till his tefillin come later? That was his dilemma. So I did look it up on what I had to hand, and then later looked it up a bit further. In the Mogen Avraham, in Siman Samach Vav, he has quite a discussion about this, and he has some very interesting proofs to come to the conclusion which we see here, and that is a talus is one thing, but daven without a talus, and daven with a minyan. But with tefillin, you should not daven with a minyan, and rather wait till you go get your tefillin. So this is what we have in the Alter Rebbe. Mishein lo tefillin. For you don't have tefillin, but tzibur mispalalim. And the minyan is davening. Mutar sheis akev ad achar tefillas tzibur. You should wait till after the tzibur have davened, if you can, and to borrow tefillin from someone else. So in order that you should read Shema and daven wearing tefillin, and to accept upon you the oil malchus shamayim shlema in a total way, rather than davening with the tzibur without tefillin. Yoid edus shekabiyat. So this is the psak halacha, that he should wait till after davening, when he'll be able to borrow a pair of tefillin. Right. So it's straightforward. Let's move on to the next thing. Someone asks about challah baking. Now, I've been getting lots of shilas about challah baking. Baruch Hashem, lots of you groups are coming together to bake challahs as a schus for Chen of Bnei Yisrael in Eretz HaKodesh. So yeah, everything is a schus. So now the question here, but it's not necessarily because of this is the question: at what stage should challah be taken? Should you take challah, wait till the dough has risen, or is that irrelevant? So first of all, we have here, this is from Shulchan Aruch, Yeridea, the Simshin Chav Zayin. At what stage is a dough called a dough? So as soon as water meets flour, that's the beginning of a dough. And so even at that stage, water meets flour, you could already be mafresh challah, provided that there's not going to be unwetted flour. There's going to be dry flour in the bowl, which is more than the shear, or the shear is whatever, 1,200 grams, whatever it may be. So long as there isn't that amount of loose flour, so then you can be mafresh challah. Then he says further, there's another option. You can take challah, even though there is lots of flour in the bowl, which hasn't been kind of incorporated into the dough, and you say this is challah for that which will be later become part of this dough. That would also be valid. And he says also for the flour which is mixed in when you roll out the challahs. So when you want to shape the loaves, so often you're going to work on a counter or on the table, and you'll scatter flour so that the dough shouldn't stick to the table. So that flour, you want that flour also to be part of the mitzvah, part of the, yeah. So is that also included? Or usually it's a minimal amount. So he says it's toiv lelamed lenoshim. You should teach the women to have in mind the flour which will be added later. But here the Ramah says, really, that's not much of a concern, only if there will be a sheer challah of extra flour mixed in during the shaping of the loaves. But tzorich zoher, one thing you have to be careful. If you're going to take challah now and have in mind the future flour which is going to be added later, but if you pop the challah straight into the fire, it won't be able to cover for any later dough because it's already been destroyed. Finally, we have here, well, he says, the Mishchanor says, better to wait, instead of having this whole business with the flour and having in mind, wait till you've put the whole thing together, and then you take challah. Now, meanwhile, this hasn't said that you have to wait till it rises. It says you just take wait till you're finished kneading it. I did see in one source, a contemporary source, about a minute to wait till it rises, but I didn't. He doesn't give a source for that. But I want to share with you something which I find very, very interesting, and that is from the Kisvei HaArizal. And now you got from the Arizal, you can see it's from the Shar Mitzvah, sorry. And so here, it's something which you hardly expect to be in Kisvei Arizal. So when you're making a dough, if it's a very soft dough, and you're shaping it, and you add flour when you're shaping it, so that it shouldn't get stuck to the board and to your hands, so you add flour. Therefore, when you mafresh challah, you should have in mind for the flour which will be joined later. Very, very interesting. The Arizal is giving advice here to be mafresh challah after you've shaped the loaves, and then ahakach yisref hachallah. Very, very strange. Because if you're mafresh before and you burnt it, it's no good. That's I explained already. But here he's saying you should wait till after the shaping of the challahs. Lepoil people don't do that. Yeah, women are mafresh challah before the shaping. I'm just wondering whether instead of not shalo yafresh hachallah, perhaps it should have been shalo yisref hachallah, and that would make things much more sensible. That you don't destroy the challah piece until after you've shaped, and therefore any added flour has been added, and then you burn the challah. They burn the piece of challah. That might be because, I mean, as I say, this is written in Kisvei Arizal, but it's the way it's written here is not followed as what in Minhag Yisrael. On the side we have here also for Bekiva Eger. At any rate, so do you have to wait till the dough rises? I don't see it as so necessary. What we do see is don't burn the piece of challah until you're finished shaping the challahs. I've had several times a dilemma. A woman has called up. She had a little 4-year-old helping her shaping the loaves, and then the piece she'd already separated for challah has disappeared, and obviously it's mixed into the dough and then becomes a whole parsha. So a tip, which I picked up in this house, is when you mafresh challah, you put it in a bag, the paper bag with the way you emptied of flour. So you put your piece of dough there, and then then it stays safe. It's not the place where you normally have dough, and clearly that dough is going to be burned. It's using the paper bag is a better idea than putting in silver foil, because silver foil it impedes the burning, whereas the paper bag will actually help burning. Okay, let's move on. Let's move on. So again, here another challah question, but not necessarily a challah bakes. But this is really with the challah, with these groups. One of the big issues is that you even if you make a large batch of dough, in order to make a bracha, it would have to be that a shear of challah remains in the ownership of one woman. So where you have here in the Shulchan Aruch, this is Simaresh Samavov, Aval Shar Odom Ha'oise Iso Lechalko Botzek. If I am making a batch of dough with the intention to distribute it to different owners, to divide it whilst it's still dough, then that's pot. It's as if it doesn't have a shear, even though it's a large bowl with several kilos of flour. But because I'm giving each woman just 1 kilo, so then each one, it's as if there's only it's a separate batch. A kilo is too small to be mafresh challah. So that's a challenge with these groups. Either you give each woman a shear challah, which means they're going to produce about 3 or 4 loaves at least, or just one woman makes a bracha on a larger amount of dough, which she's going to keep, and the other women will just listen. Right. So this woman now, what was her question? Her question was, at home I'm making a large batch of dough. I don't need so much for this Shabbos, so I want to make a large batch of dough, be mafresh challah, put half of it into the freezer, and the end of next week, for Thursday, Friday, I'll let it defrost, and I'll make it into loaves and bake it then. So this is her question. Can she make a bracha today if half of the dough is going to go into the freezer? So there is an opinion. Now here we have the Piskei Tshuva. He brings here that when it says lechalka means to numerous people. But if you're dividing it for yourself, that's not called lechalik. That's not considered you're dividing it, because it's going to remain yours. The Madani Melech, the commentary on the Rosh, he actually says no. If you are dividing it even from the morning to the evening, that's also called lechalka. And he says that the Tiferes Moshe disagrees. So this is where I was a little bit hesitant. I know that there is this opinion which says if you're dividing it for 2 sessions, it's also called dividing. Now, here is from the Tzemach Tzedek. So the Tzemach Tzedek in the Reish Lamed Hey, he talks about this whole topic of a dough which is made to divide, and he goes through the various shittas, and he says there's a machloikas indeed between the levush and the lechem chamudos. The lechem chamudos and the madane melech is the same thing. Nira livsoy kehalavush, that dividing to have 2 sessions, so you're going to have some of it now, some are going to bake later, is not an issue, because the Raiva Bichlal disagrees with this whole din if it's about lechalka being an exemption for challah. So the Tzemach Tzedek, he rejects this opinion of the lechem chamudos, the madane melech, and consequently we go back to say that lechalka, when it says in Shulchan Aruch, lechalka means lechalka to separate people, separate owners. But one person who's taking her own dough and dividing it into 2 sessions, some for now, some for later, that would not be a problem. Okay, and next you can make a bracha today, even though half is going to go into the freezer. Okay, let's move on. A typical Chabad house type of question. On the first day of Sukkot, which was on Shabbos, someone came into the Chabad house and he says, I'm traveling tonight. That's Motzei Shabbos, which is the second night of Yom Tov. Now, this could have happened in Eretz Yisrael, would be a more innocent question. It actually happened in Chutz La'aretz, and therefore he shouldn't have been traveling. But he's come in and he says, I'm not going to be able to do lulav for the rest of Sukkot because I'm traveling tonight. So therefore I want to take it on Shabbos. Can you allow him to take it? Do you stop him, etc., etc.? So here, this type of question, don't expect to find in classics for him. But what we do have is the fellow got up in the morning, benched lulav with everything, with the brachas, the shechianu and everything. And then he realized, oops, it's Shabbos, I shouldn't have done it. Next morning, does he have to say shechianu? Or can he say shechianu like everyone else? Or do we say, no, you've done it already yesterday? So if there is so we know that Torah he should have been benching lulav. With Rabbanon they say you don't. So here's the question: if you bench lulav, oh, who was it? My son in Wyoming. I think I told you this. That he on Rosh Hashanah he went looking for Yidden to hear shofar, and so this was obviously on the Sunday, and he met someone, and the fellow had said, "I heard it yesterday, in the Reform Temple or something." So is the B'diavad, is that considered that they have done a mitzvah, although the Rabbanon say not to? This is the question. And so we have here sources you can see in the, so what he says over here, if someone, this is from Pisket Shuvas, and he says if someone by mistake did bench lulav on the first day, which was on Shabbos, and said Shechianu, should not say Shechianu the following day. And he gives a reference here to Mikroe Kodesh, and that is it's a work which is based upon the writings of Reb Tzvi Pesach Frank. So his own svarim are called Har Tzvi, and this is like Talmidim kind of took some of his writings and developed it a bit. At any rate, he says Yesh Loima de Min HaTorah Yotzi Lechivosei, that although the Rabbanon said not to take lulav on the first day of Sukkot, or shofar on the first, on the first day of Rosh Hashanah if it's on Shabbos, but Min HaTorah he did do the mitzvah. Therefore, you wouldn't be able to say Shechianu because he's already done the mitzvah in Min HaTorah. And so on that basis, there is room to say that the person shouldn't be doing what he's doing, but if he does it, he is doing a mitzvah. So that allows our tolerance level to be a little bit wider. Now, someone asked me this question about a metal sink which has two bowls. It was some while ago. I don't remember even who it was. I don't remember whether I had answered. And then it came up in school in the lesson, and then I realized I owe someone out there an answer. So here we have from I found this in a sefer called Psokim and Shuvas, and he gives a reference to the sefer called Vayan Yosef, which is the Shuvas of the Puparov, the late Puparov, and he talks about the sink. And he says if the sink had a single wall, which is separating between the fleishik side and milchik side, that would be more of a problem. But he says our sinks, actually, they have separate walls. It's made from one piece of metal, but the metal which is on the milchik side is not the metal which is on the fleishik side. There's a gap in between. The only issue is, does the heat go up to the top, and then does the fleishik taste go into the wall and go up the top and then go down to the other side? So he says that even though we have a concept of cham miktzos cham kulay, sometimes we say that the heat does spread from one part to the other, but that doesn't mean that the taste is going to also spread from one to the other. And basically he says it is okay. He says it's better to try to avoid using water which is yatse letters, but all right, it might be considered. So lechatchila, to install such a thing, lechatchila, I think, well, certainly he's saying that's not lechatchila. If you're installing a sink, it should be separate bowls totally. But if
people can hear it because it's cut off on you.
Can you hear? Just raise your hand. Can you hear? Yes or no? Yes. Iffy. Okay. Sorry, this is the best I can do. Okay, so the bottom line is that it's not so mahudar, but it is kosher. Okay, let's move on. So someone wrote to me this week that one of her children told her that if you get non-Jewish bread, obviously with kosher ingredients, but it's not pas Yisrael. But if you pop it into the toaster, then it becomes pas Yisrael. So is that true or is it not true? So the answer is it's not true. And here we have some sources. Now, the first we have a Maharil, who lived about 600 years ago. And he talks about if you had bread which was baked by a goy, and then you cooked it. So you made it into a mush. That doesn't take away the Isur. Once it has a stigma of Isur, the fact that you cooked it doesn't take it away. And so that's the Maharil, and this is in the bottom quote is from the sefer called Toras Chatos. Now, Toras Chatos is written by the Ramah. There's a commentary on that called Minchas Yaakov Reisha, and so this is from the commentary, not from the Ramah, it's from the Yaakov Reisha, and he refers to a sefer called Nachlas Shiva, who says that if you took geisha bread and soaked it, and then it's no longer called pas because it's been cooked, and he says it's wrong because it's against the Shas, and this svara was actually mentioned in the Mariel, and he rejects it totally because once it's got the stigma of a pas akum, then cooking is not going to kasher it. So no, once it's got that title of pas akum, even if you cooked it, certainly if you just toasted it, that's not going to solve the problem. If it was not totally baked, it was like not totally ready. It was like partly still needed to have like for finishing. We've gone through that before. That would be a basis for a heter. Okay. This question I got from a couple of places, and that's why I want to address it carefully. And that was, I got a question from a fellow who was driving up to Manchester on Friday, and there was abnormal traffic, and he was worried he won't be able to get to town, get home in time. So his svara was to park, to get off the motorway or whatever it was, and get an Uber to get him home. So this was his question. And what happens? This was one question. The other question was, this is from somewhere in the United States, and there's a yeshiva, a Lubavitcher yeshiva, and the boys went on Mivtzoyim, and they took an Uber to get back to the yeshiva. But again, it was stuck in terrible traffic, and what they did was they stopped off at a nearby shliach, took off all their tefillin bags, and left him at the shliach's house, and then they started, well, perhaps they made kiddush, but then they started marching towards the yeshiva, which they thought was 2.5 hours away, and it was raining. And the route is along, like what we'd call a motorway, a highway, which is illegal for pedestrians to walk along. And actually, it didn't take them 2.5 hours, it took 4 hours. And they had police coming in and seeing these, a minion of lads walking in the rain along the highway and whatever. It was a whole parsha. And so the shliach was asking, where the host of the tefillin is asking, was it right what they did, or should they have stayed in the Uber until it brings them home? So Bichlal traveling on a Friday is something which is it is something which is very questionable, letting yourself into such a risky situation, and certainly that should be avoided. But this is now again from the Piskei Teshuvos, so he says here, if it is a case of pikuach nefesh, if your life is at risk, if it's in a place where you're likely to get into trouble with the local people, then of course you'd stay in the car. And what happens if it was more than a Tchum Shabbos, because it was open country which you traveled? So then you'd be stuck. You wouldn't be allowed to leave the Dal Amos, where you were delivered to. And he brings a very interesting story that the Gerer Rebbe, the Imre Emes, this is back in Poland. The late Reb Pinchas Menachem remembered the story. So it was a case that there was a group of Chassidim who were traveling to the Rebbe for Shabbos, and they got stuck. They got stuck in the forest, and they were exposed to danger. And somehow word got to Ger, and they sent a goy with a wagon to fetch them. But when they came to the town, to Ger, they were told they have to stay in their accommodation. They're not allowed to leave their accommodation. They wouldn't be allowed to come to the tish or anything, because they had so it looks like the Rebbe, the Imre Emes, had felt that they had acted irresponsibly by traveling so close. And since it was an irresponsible thing, therefore they are penalized, that they're stuck in the Dal Damas till the rest of Shabbos. So the Dal Damas being their accommodation, they weren't allowed to come in. So, all right. So when there's a case of Pikuach Nefesh, then the answer is you stay in. You stay in the car. If it's not Pikuach Nefesh, so then you do have that the goy, you can have a goy doing work for you, l'tzorech gadol, and ben hashmoshes. So there is benefit. And now the case in the Manchester case, he was already in the built-up area of Manchester. The goy could drive him till was 18 minutes, whatever, after 20 minutes after Lichtsinden. Sorry, after Shkia, is Ben Hashmoshes. So he has another 20 odd minutes where he could still benefit from a goy doing work for him, a malocha for him, Ben Hashmoshes. At that point, he would have to, if it's not dangerous, to walk from there to his home, he would have to get out of the car. And now going back to this group of boys, they had an option of staying where they were, but it wasn't Pikuach Nefesh, and therefore they wouldn't be allowed to stay in the car beyond Bein Hashmoshes. That's my understanding of it, and therefore I think they were right in what they did. They were that they walked rather than allow themselves to be driven into Shabbos. They could have perhaps gained another 20 minutes with Bein Hashmoshes, but beyond that, they would have to take a walk. Right, let's move on. There's a famous story of two people who came, it was in the papers, I think, also Rabbi Gerelik and also the late, Evadia Stroxel Shalom, they, in the 50s, how they had arrived at, forgotten the name of JFK before it became JFK. At any rate, so they came so late that they had to walk from the airport into Crown Heights, and they had police escort. So it was also an item which got into the papers. Okay, now next thing here we have is a shliach is sitting with a group of students and discussing. So there came up the question whether a person is allowed to put his own life at risk in order to save someone else. Not only a Suffolk. We're talking here. The way they described it is a grenade was thrown, and it's heading towards someone, and he jumps in and gets the grenade rather than someone else. I'm sure some of you remember about 10 years ago there was a case of a certain boy he had been, I think, by Keva Yosef, and it looks like he was a big troublemaker. And then about a year later, he was with a group of soldiers, and a grenade was thrown, and this boy jumped and took the grenade, and he was killed, and he saved everyone else. So this is the question: is that legitimate or not? And unfortunately, this is can be a very real question, putting one's own life. Risking one's own life, or more than that, forfeiting one's own life in order to save someone else. Now, what you have on the screen is from the Sefer Encyclopedia Talmudis, and this is in volume Lamed Ches, under the heading of Ma'abel Atzmel Odas, which is the Hebrew term for suicide. And so the earlier entry was talking about a person forfeiting his life in order to save a community, to save numerous people. What about forfeiting his own life in order to save another single person? So we have the famous idea, which is mentioned in Tanya, that there's two people traveling in the desert, and one of them has a bottle of water. And if both of them will drink, neither of them will survive. And so you have the idea of chayecha koidmin, look after your life before someone else. So some Achronim write, so therefore to forfeit your own life to save someone else's life, it would not be allowed. Others disagree, and they say it would be allowed.
And they say that although it says chayecha koidmin, that means that you're allowed to put your own life before someone else's life, but a person has the right to choose to do the other way around. So we should have Surah Tavis and not have this dilemma. But there is, if someone, there is room for that opinion too. One last question for tonight, and that is a shliach had asked me about using, you can see on the screen, this kind of hot cupboard, and could it be used before Shabbos, to put food in before Shabbos, or to put food in it on Shabbos? So he told me that the temperature can be from 80 degrees Fahrenheit till 185 Fahrenheit. Now, there is a term called Yad Seledesboy, which means that your hand would touch it, you'd recoil. That's the idea, Yad Seledesboy. What temperature is Yad Seledesboy? So generally it's assumed to be around 115, 120 degrees Fahrenheit would be Yad Seledesboy. So well, let's deal with the one thing about putting stuff in before Shabbos and taking it out on Shabbos. I don't see, I looked at the specifications, but I didn't see the detail, but I'm sure this works on a thermostat. And that's how it's able to keep a reasonably even temperature, because it goes on and off periodically. So now what's going to happen is when you open the door, there's going to be a rush of room temperature air into the chamber, and so it's going to drop in temperature. The thermostat is going to wake up and say it's getting too cool in here. It's going to switch on the element. So that would be a problem. If you'd know that the element is on now, then you would be allowed to open it, even though it's going to cause the element to burn for longer. That's not such a problem. But to ignite, to wake it up, that wouldn't be okay. So that's about putting it in before Shabbos. So you'd only be allowed to open it when you can hear or see. Sometimes there can be a light when you know that it's on. When you know that the element is currently on, then you would be allowed to open it. Now, after Shabbos, I opened my email. I saw he asked if he's allowed to ask if they have a goyish worker, waitress, whatever, helper, would be allowed to ask them to open it. And the answer is yes. I answered that definitely is okay. And that is because, as far as Amir al-Nochri goes, if you ask them to do A, and as a consequence, B is going to happen, that's what we call the idea of psikresha, that's not a problem with Amir al-Nochri. It's only the thing which the mission which you have to ask them to do. The other things which happen by the way are you can ignore. So to ask a guy to open this, that's not a problem. To put stuff in on Shabbos, that's going to be more of a problem if it's beyond Yad Seledesboy, because we have the idea of chazorah. You're only allowed to put food back to the blech, etc., only if it was there before Shabbos and you took it off and you're holding it and it's still hot. But to take cold food from the fridge or whatever for storage, to take cold food and put it into a source of heat which is more than Yad Seledesboy would be a violation of the laws of Chazara, which, as far as I understand, it would not be okay. If it would be less than Yad Seledesboy, let's say 100 degrees or whatever, possibly then it would be permitted to put food in, and it's going to warm it up. It's not going to be very hot, but if that's what they're looking for, that might be okay. All right, I'm going to stop there. We have another couple of minutes. I think it's appropriate that we say a chapter of Tehillim for the Eden and the in Eretz HaKodesh, both the hostages and the soldiers, that they should all be safe and return home safely to their families. So if you can share with me, join with me, we're going to say Kapitel Chof and then put in Stoker. I mentioned last time, although it's by night, but we're talking about, as we're talking about people's lives are in danger. And so it's appropriate to say Tehillim, and about Stoker, putting Stoker by night Putting in a pushka is not a problem, as discussed in the Rebbe's Sichos, letters, etc. Now is not time to discuss it. So let's do together Kapitel Chof, and then each one put in stocker. Lam Natseach Mizmel David. Yancho Adonai B'Yom Tzoro Yisagevcho Shem Elihei Yaakov. Yishlach Ezrecha Mikodesh Umitzion Yisodeko. Yizker Kol Min Chisecho V'Ilosecho Yedash Naselo. Yiten Lecho Chil Vovecho V'Chol Atzosecho Yemale. Neraneno B'Shuasecho V'Shem Eliheinu Nidgel. Yemale Adonai Kol Mishalisecho. Atu Yodati Ki Yahishia Adonai Meshichoi Ya'anehu Mishmei Kodshoi Yigvures Yeshe Yeminoi. Eile Vorechev Eile Ve'eile Vasusim V'Anachnu B'Shem Adonai Eliheinu Nazkir. Hei Mokoru V'Nafolu V'Anachnu Kamnu V'Anis Oidod. Adonai Hishio HaMelech Ya'aneinu V'Yem Karenu. A gute Woche, and we should hear Besudas Tapes. God.
Amen.
Shkoyach.